We're starting the last talk of this season of Fashion Forward, and so many of you have been supportive of all of the talks, and we very much appreciate you being here and being part of the community. We're ending on a very important note, sustainability, the future of fashion. I don't know how many of you, but every time I take a plastic bottle to my lips, I have a feeling of nagging guilt. And this industry, of course, there's a lot of sustainability-related issues. And I'm very thankful to have Hannah RASEKH with us. She flew in from London to moderate this talk, where she's currently working on her second master's degree focused on fashion sustainability. So we're very happy to have you here. I'm going to hand it over. Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Hannah RASEKH, and I'd like to welcome you all here today at Fashion Forward, one of the region's biggest, most important fashion events, if not the most important fashion event. I'd like to think they kept the best for last, so I'm very honored and humble to be here today, talking about one of the hottest topics in the industry right now, and a subject that's very dear to my heart, sustainability, a movement that's fostering change in our fashion ecosystem. Sustainability in practice is the continuous work to improve all the stages of a product's life cycle. And I'm sharing the stage with three fabulous women who will give us some insight into what's going on in the world of sustainability. So we're reevaluating how we consume product and how we produce products. And these lovely ladies are going to talk to us a little bit about what's going on. So I'd like to introduce you to SHAHD ALSHEHAIL, social entrepreneur and designer. And she is the co-founder of Abadieh and Project Just, her two ventures, which we'll discuss a little later on. She is also a social entrepreneur and designer, so she'll talk to us a little bit about her business ventures in a little bit. REEMA BANNA, designer and founder of Sharjah-based label REEMAMI. REEMA is on a mission to highlight female empowerment, and she's about to make her label 100% sustainable, so we'll talk to her a little bit about that. And KSHATRIYA-CERRI is a brand consultant who recently founded her consultancy SARAYÖ. And after 20 impressive years in the fashion industry, former board of Chanel, Bonpoint, and has worked closely at Givenchy for their revamp under Riccardo Tisci, so very impressive background. So let's actually start with PAYAL. Things are getting serious. Fast fashion is having a profound effect on the climate. If you can just talk to us a little bit about what's going on in the world and the breakdown of the climate and how fast fashion is playing a role in this.
Absolutely. Fast fashion today, fashion in general, contributes to about 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. It's only second to the oil and gas industry, and it is before the shipping and the airline industry combined. So you are looking at dramatic proportions here. Fast fashion is also responsible for 20% of the water pollution globally. And when I try to make sense of these numbers, I mean, what is it that we're really looking at? What does the common person understand of these numbers? Is that we're looking at about 10 billion garments globally, manufactured, consumed globally, and 10 billion garments would mean 13 pieces per person, assuming that half of us on the planet can't even afford fast fashion, right? So we are looking at statistics which are absolutely shocking. The garment industry produces microfiber that I guess many of you all have heard of, which is equal to 7 to 8 million tons of plastic bags, 7 to 8 million plastic bags thrown into our oceans every day. I mean, just a number that really shocks me is when Levi's officially published a number, and this figure comes from Levi's, a pair of jeans takes 3,780 liters to manufacture. I mean, I consume 1 liter of water a day, so personally, if I were to drink that water for about 7 to 8 years. So I think this is the real impact that we're talking about. And yes, and I think that companies today are really beginning to look at this question very seriously.
Thank you. I mean, fashion is one of the biggest polluters in the world, with carbon emissions even higher than the airline industry, which, I mean, considering the airline industry, you can imagine how polluting it is. But also on a micro level, REEMA, fast fashion affects the regional designer and the local designers. So how is that affecting you, and what challenges do you face?
I feel like fast fashion also is one of the reasons why a lot of brands are getting copied. Maybe also like a lot of the production is like just overloaded. It always ends up in landfills, and a lot of it is just, you know, completely. Sorry, your question was?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's always a struggle for a regional designer when they're faced with fast fashion, because there's always a cheaper option. And so, I mean, your support is really important to regional designers, and right? I mean, regional, the only way that we can thrive and have our creatives thrive is by supporting them, and fast fashion is making us struggle a little bit. But Shahd, fashion and sustainability are at the core of your brand, Abadieh. Can you tell us how you launched and what inspired you to launch your brand?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. So Abadieh is an ethical luxury brand. We focus on preserving the craftsmanship of our region through contemporary, timeless design. And the reason I say we're an ethical luxury brand and not a sustainable brand is because in this part of the industry, and as sustainability is becoming more and more of a buzzword, it's so easy to make big claims that maybe are not backed up with further actual action and work on the ground. So when it comes to the problems with the fashion industry, there's definitely the social side of things. People, workers being paid fair wages, being treated fairly, and all of that. And there's the environmental side of things, which PAYAL has so well highlighted. So we, from an ethical perspective, make sure that our supply chain and our production is all in support of the people that work on our brand, that they are valued and have an additional value brought into their life as a result of working on Abadieh. We also work with artisans across the UAE and Saudi to preserve the craftsmanship and bring sustainable source of income to those artisans, which are mainly women. They're mainly older in age and have families to support. And from a sustainability perspective, we do our best. We're not perfect, and I encourage, I think, a lot of the brands that are working on sustainability issues to talk about the fact that it's very hard for a brand to be perfectly sustainable, but we need to be honest about the work that we're doing and what we're doing well and also what we're failing at. We recycle a lot of our fibers. We use dead stock fabric. We don't waste material, but could we be doing more? 100%.
It's actually very, very challenging, which is why I'd like to ask you, Reema, what are you doing to make your brand 100% sustainable? I can imagine that it's a real challenge.
Well, it's a transition and it takes time, like Shahd said. There's a lot to do. There's a lot of ways to cut your patterns, maybe zero waste. I do a lot of recycling to like the fabrics that are extra. I print some fabrics, I hand sketch my fabrics, and all the extra prints I use as headbands or like pieces to add to the collection. There's so many ways that that a brand can turn sustainable, and it's not that hard. Like, make sure that the workers you work with are having a decent salary and they're getting paid on time and all these things, and as well as using sustainable fabrics, which is also a major transition because the industry, the industry is new to this, and the suppliers in the UAE are, still adapting to the old styles, like fast fashion It's a transition, I think.
I did want to ask you, I'm not sure what you're going to say. I've just calmed down. I was really nervous at the beginning of this talk. So, I just wanted to ask you, so I feel like in simple terms, it's always better to, because sometimes you have to explain to someone in simple terms, in terms of ethics and being an ethical brand. How would you explain the importance of brands like yours making steps to becoming being ethical? Like, how would you explain it to someone not well versed in this?
I think it's the only way of doing business, and should be the only way of doing business. None of us here want to go to work, spend a lot of hours doing a lot of work, and then not be appreciated or paid or treated fairly. So if you don't want it for yourself, why would you want it for anybody else? So to me, it's just the basics of doing business. I think that it's important, as I said, to take like smaller steps to doing it, but maybe something that's a bit controversial for someone who owns a fashion brand to say, I think maybe the first sustainable step we can do is to ask people to buy less. As an owner of a fashion brand, I encourage people to not buy as much as the fast fashion has promoted in terms of disposability and constantly like buy more, throw it. I'd rather people invest in pieces that they love, that they care for, that they'll wear over and over again, and cherish and maybe mend when it breaks or something happens to it. But I think that's our number one step towards sustainability, is to sort of take a step back and lower consumption.
Absolutely. I think less is more, especially in this fashion climate at the moment, like smarter purchasing decisions. But I think people are beginning to listen. There's a lot happening. PAYAL, as a brand consultant, are having so many years of experience in the industry. How have you seen the industry changed and evolved over the past 10 years in terms of sustainability? How are things going?
I think working at the heart of Paris for so many years, I mean, the last 5 years has been more or less like a tsunami for us, you know, because we saw the onset of social media, which was a very difficult phase for most luxury brands, because you had to readapt your vision, your strategy, to a very different mode of selling. But at the same time, you had to readapt your strategy to how you produce. So how we buy and how we sell has changed over the years. Now, one of the things that I have always worked on, so sustainability has become the buzzword of the moment. But at the same time, I mean, I remember being at Givenchy. I joined in 2005, and one of the first projects that they made me work on, besides the design studio, because I had both hats, I had the creative and the business hat, was working on a European law called REACH. And REACH had a list of about 1,900 chemicals, which had 165 that were hazardous to human health and the environment. And the European Union wanted us to actually comply within a year. And that is all great when you're looking at factories in the developed world, which have the technology, which have the means to go behind it. But when you're looking at factories, even in India or in China or different places that we're manufacturing, it was just a very difficult game there. And so I had suppliers who just didn't want to sign anything. They had no compliances. So, but all through these years, I think that brands have been working a lot underground on the process, even though sustainability has become a buzzword now. I mean, I can speak for Europe personally because I've been there in working with these brands, is that it's been a very conscious effort through the years. I think the effort now has accelerated. Like Kering, I think Kering is one of the companies, I'm not a spokesperson for Kering, I've never worked for Kering, but Kering has been on it since 1996. And even today, I mean, sustainability is at the heart of many luxury brands. And I think that what has happened over the years with the pressure, with social media, so one of the great things about social media coming on board, and influencers is probably not the right word for you, you're doing a lot more than that, but you know, entrepreneurs like SHAHD, REEMA, I think that there's a lot of awareness. I think consumers want it. They are sick of it. So I think there's people that have kind of moved on, and like you rightly said, I mean, less is more, and we need to consume better and more. So they are under a lot of pressure, but I think that at the same time, they are happy that things will evolve in these factories that we've been working in. So I mean, personally, I've visited about 500 factories in my career in different continents. Stop counting long back. And the difference that I looked at in every factory, whether it was Portugal or India or France or Italy, was dramatic. So I think we're looking at closing the gap here. And sustainability will involve environmental, ethical, human rights issues here.
Thank you. And this is implying that brands are setting genuine and authentic sustainability goals, because we can see that there's this very controversial and somewhat disturbing trend of greenwashing. And greenwashing is making a misleading claim that your company is environmentally friendly when it's not, or that your product has environmental benefits when it really does not. So I was talking to SHAHD just now about this, and I want to talk to you about Project Just, because it's an online database for shoppers to source information on the sustainable and ethical practice. So in terms of greenwashing, how can your platform empower customers to make better purchasing decisions and better choices?
So when we started Project Just in 2013, the goal was that I didn't know where my clothes came from. I didn't know what the story was behind them. I couldn't find that story out. And with that ambiguity of the supply chain and the story hides a lot of human rights abuses, hides a lot of environmental abuses. And so how can I know, number one? And two, how can these brands be held accountable as a result of that information being public? So at the time, we created a database of 150 brands that are well-researched about their supply chain and where things are come from, and as a consumer, you can go in, search a brand, and learn that information. I think knowledge and information is key. Like, without it, there will be no accountability for, yeah, absolutely, it's 100% power, and with it comes that sense of accountability that leads eventually to change.
And your platform is amazing, and there are so many wonderful platforms out there, and there's this new phenomenon of circular fashion, and so you have circular platforms like the Real and Rent the Runway and the local Designer 24 and all of these sorts of platforms, but there are still some stigmas in the Middle East surrounding these platforms and circular fashion. So Payal, can you tell us a little bit about the stigmas in the Middle East compared to Europe and the States?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because you mentioned Real, and Real was, so there was in France, there was a company called Vestiaire Collective, which launched in 2009, compared to Real, which launched probably a couple of years later. And I remember being in a Real store in New York, and I didn't know what Real was then. I knew what Vestiaire Collective was because I'm a buyer and a seller since 10 years now on Vestiaire Collective.
I'm sorry, just the Real, maybe some people are not. Yeah, maybe some people are not aware of what the Real is, but it's a pre-owned luxury marketplace, so similar to the local luxury closet, and circular fashion, just extending the product's life cycle using mainly the rental model. So,
absolutely. Yeah. So circular, coming back to circular fashion, I think there's basically two main actors in the circular fashion, which is the companies themselves, like what REEMA does, for example, so recycling fabrics, fibers, everybody doing their bit in the companies, the brands or the manufacturers, and then you have circular fashion for consumers, which is basically, I think, the word that's kind of comes to mind is are we at the end of, or beginning of the end of the ownership era? When I say ownership, what I mean is, all of us buy new garments today, right? In Europe, personally, I do have many pieces in my wardrobe that are what we used to call second-hand 20 years ago, and then it became pre-owned, and now it's pre-loved. Yeah. So I am wearing garments that somebody else loved, and I love them. And the thing is, and I always have, and these are not just luxury items I'm talking about. I'm talking about, I've bought pieces that I have sold, things that I probably bought for 50 euros, and I sell them for 5 euros. And I sell them in town hall markets in Paris, and I enjoy it. At the end of the day, when I go back home with 300 euros, I am the most happiest woman in the world because I've renewed my wardrobe. In Japanese, there's a concept called KonMari, and it's about decluttering. And I think the Japanese have got this right, like way before anyone else in the world. So they're a lot about circular, everything circular, whether it's fashion, whether it's furniture. And I love that concept personally. So if you guys don't know what that is, I think it's interesting to look it up. And I believe that it kind of declutters what you're doing, and circular fashion is about that. And the stigmas associated, I completely agree. So I am from India, and I think that most of my entourage in India wouldn't be buying something that's been previously worn by, I mean, they'll be happy with a bag or an accessory that hasn't been worn on a person. And I do believe that in the Middle East, it's probably more or less similar. I'm not an expert because I've just moved here, but I do think that mentalities are changing. So, you know, coming back to my story about Real, so I walked into the store in New York, and I thought that these were first-hand items. I walked around and I was with a creative designer, and she didn't know what Real was, and we were convinced that because they're all so well kept, well maintained, clean items. So I think that there's a cap that we all need to kind of pass and tell ourselves that, you know, every item that we own doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, bought by us firsthand. And I think that it's our contribution to the planet and our contribution to, you know, the environmental changes that we're talking about. So I think it is really something that will pick on. And I do believe that thanks to platforms such as these, with Fashion Forward, thanks to people like yourself, I think we all have the opportunity to bring these stories forward and make them more meaningful and more real. And of course, Europe has been fairly ahead, but I do believe that other regions, thanks to social media, are catching up now.
Absolutely. I mean, the fashion climate is just crazy right now. I think Rent the Runway, which is a rental platform, just opened their first brick and mortar store. So you can walk in, try a dress on, and rent it, and then bring it back, which is something actually that was very popular in the 80s. So it's just fashion always comes back, doesn't it? But in terms of sustainability and the internal functions of a business, we've seen all of these brands, carrying Gucci, all of these brands are hiring sustainability chiefs, sustainability experts, setting forth sustainability plans. How important is it to have an expert on board? I know you just launched your consultancy, SARAYÖ, so how important is it to have somebody on board your team and who can guide you on this sustainability journey?
I think it's absolutely key, because when I just think of a basic thing, like if few of us sitting around a room and you know, kind of talking about what your brand will be doing in 10 years, one of the key things is that we look at most brands, you're looking at brands that have a heritage of anything between 50 to 100 years. So one thing that we tend to forget behind that there are real human beings in these brands, human beings that are spending you know, probably a lifetime working there, and it's a Herculean task to get everyone moving forward. So if you have a focused person on the strategic committee of these brands, I think that, you know, he or she can get things moving. And I think that there is, you know, a vision that, I mean, earlier it was probably talking about sustainability was, you know, what you need to comply with the European law. But it wasn't where are we really going in 10 years. So I do believe that, you know, they're called sustainability chiefs now, but they were roles that people like myself occupied, you know, without the role. And I do believe that my contribution, I mean, I'm really new here, like I said, and I launched my company about 1 month ago. But I do believe that, you know, my contribution, and this is my personal raison d'etre, is that with my years of experience, I think I would do much better contributing to young designers and emerging designers in the region. And I was actually, you know, kind of encouraged so through In5, I did some mentorships for a few months, and I was encouraged by one of my clients. I don't know if she's here in the audience, but she has a brand called Marmari, and it's all about ethical sourcing. And I love working with her because I do realize how much brands want to do these things, but they don't have the basics of how to, you know, the nuts and bolts and the vision, and say, well, where am I going from here? What am I doing in 5 years? Why am I doing this? I think that we all need to ask that very basic question, why am I doing this?
Absolutely. I feel like having an expert on board to tell you where you can cut costs, especially when it comes to sustainability. Like I find that excessive packaging is a big deal and a big issue in the Middle East with press gifts. They're very beautiful and very nicely decorated, but it's just very, very excessive, and it's just really a shame. So, Reema, I want to ask you, so in recycling and doing all of these things to become sustainable, does the Middle Eastern consumer appreciate it? Do you see that it makes a difference to customers?
I think the Middle Eastern consumer is becoming aware of all the effects of the extra packaging and things like that, but still I feel like some of them do appreciate like a good package. So sometimes that's why I kind of tend to use recycled boxes until now, but I'm trying to shift towards like a more sustainable kind of packaging. But also packaging tells the story behind the brand, so it's also like a medium for...
I mean, you have to be really strategic with how minimal the packaging is in order to get your message and the story across. But I'm always calling out brands on excessive packaging. So I'm always emailing brands and saying, I received this product. So the other day I received a skin roller, and the roller came in a box, and the box came in a pouch, and the pouch came in a box, and the box came in a bag. So I sent an email to the brand, a lengthy email, telling them how they can minimize their packaging. Quite a lengthy email, and I haven't gotten a response back yet. But Shahd, there's this rise of like the watchdog culture. So everybody's watching you, and everybody wants to figure out what you're doing, and big Instagram accounts like Diet Prada and Estee Laundry are calling out brands on plagiarism, excessive packaging, and all that sort of stuff. What are your thoughts on naming and shaming and calling brands out? Do you think it's effective?
I think it plays a role. I definitely think it plays a role in like creating a bit of a buzz and a trickle effect, and people are listening and people do care. But is it the most effective way to create real change? I don't think so. At the end of the day, I think change happens beyond those conversations. That's just the tip of the iceberg, where you spark something and you start something. With Project Just, for example, we decided we didn't want to go the name and shame route, and we did that for a reason, because we wanted to focus more on information and for people to get that information and to start a conversation, hopefully, with brands to actually do change. We didn't want to isolate them and put them in a corner and therefore like not have them be invested in creating change. But I have to say, I think there's place for Diet Prada in today's world. I think they're important.
I love Diet Prada.
Yeah, I think they're important, and I think there's space for them, especially I think from a plagiarism perspective, sustainability and ethics also, but like from a plagiarism perspective, nobody before talked about it in the way that they're talking about it, and it happens across the industry so rapidly. It's a really bad practice.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, we have to get our message across somehow, and I'm not sure name and shame is the best route, but
it's a start.
So far I enjoy the drama on Instagram.
It's a start.
But social responsibility falls under the sustainability umbrella. So Reema, in a lot of your designs, you have these themes to push women to lead more active lifestyles. And sorry, I forgot my question. Do you feel like you have a responsibility as a brand? Do you have a social responsibility to be a mover and a shifter in our community?
The themes I pick for my collections usually just happen very naturally, because that's how I live my life. That's what I do like on a daily basis, and now I feel stronger, and I want to share it with people. Like it's, for example, sports like boxing or climbing or surfing. It's just, I feel like I want people to try new things. I want to push them, motivate them, and trying a new sport or starting a new thing and like improving and progressing in it is just a beautiful joy. And I feel like it's an indirect message for women to make them achieve their goals and look towards what they want to do in life.
That's amazing, because fashion is so emotional as well. So if a garment can make you do something, it's just incredible. Like if something inspires you to do something, it's incredible. And there's a WGSN report out for next year, and it states that there's this trend of consumers craving emotional connection and a personal touch in the purchasing experience. Payal, I wanted to ask you, how do you think brands can tap into getting their message across using this kind of new trend of like more emotional?
I think it's a super tricky question there. So I think, first and foremost, fashion in general, whether luxury or fast, I mean, what is it that how do we sell? We're selling by creating dreams. We're selling by creating aspirational. It has the aspirational value. So sustainable or not, you have to be able to continue creating that aspirational value tomorrow, and that's where the tricky part lies. Now, Shahd mentioned something about, working, the platform that she's created, working with artisans, and it's the essence of luxury is about excellence, and this is why I'm in the business. Is I love well-made products. I love keeping traditions, handicrafts over the world. So I think that brands need to bring that focus back. So of course, in a digital tech age, I believe it's quite a challenge in the sense that brands have been focusing on client experience in store. I mean, that's the projects that I've been hearing for years now. And all of a sudden, we need to focus on something that's digital, and how do you get to doing that? I think that, a mix of the two today, which is digital plus in-store experience, is the best way to kind of engage with your client. And make it authentic, telling real stories, engaging with the customer. And you mentioned personal and, the personal experience bit. So the digital platform will mainly allow you to kind of create a personalized experience. I don't know if you guys have heard of the word, but a personalized experience is about algorithms, tracking what you've bought and then kind of proposing more, right? Whilst a personal experience is about putting humanity back into the picture. So I think that brands need a combination of both today. And, in the social media age that we're all constantly on our phones. And we've lost that human contact. So I think that telling authentic stories, reaching out, sharing values, creating a platform with people who share values such as yours, like you're doing, I think this is completely the way forward. And if brands have a physical point of contact, that makes the experience all the more extraordinary. I think that is really the only way forward. And I think Dubai, this is the 5th time I'm saying it, I'm new to Dubai, but it's a hotspot for, the fashion shoppers world over. And I think Dubai does have a lot to contribute by engaging in this conversation with partners across the world in creating that exceptional experience and not just making it about selling another piece, and yeah.
Lovely.
I completely agree with Payal, and I think the storytelling is obviously very intrinsic and part of this industry, and it's an important part of connecting with the consumers. But I do agree with you that the story has to be authentic. Like, I think we're at a stage right now where consumers are much more savvier, they know more, they are much more discerning, so they can read through inauthentic stories, and that's important, like, to keep that. Tell the story that's authentic, be honest as a brand, tell what you're doing well and tell what you're struggling with. I think that's really key here.
Yeah, and people tend to see so much during the day on Instagram and their feeds and stuff, so everything is always pushed to their faces. So I feel like there should be a kind of connection, an emotional connection to the brand, to something they can relate to. Or
absolutely, it's very, very, fashion is very, very emotional. I mean, I don't know, but every year John Lewis releases a Christmas ad that makes everybody tear up in the UK, and it makes everybody like very, very emotional. And I think that triggers something in you. It makes you want to go to John Lewis, but still, it's very, very emotional. I just wanted to say thank you all for being with us, and we can take a few minutes if anybody has any questions for any of our speakers on anything. Speaker in the back. Question in the back.
Hi. Hello, ladies. This is Sarah from the national newspaper down in Abu Dhabi. Collectively to you all, how strong an influence would you say that customers have, rather than a brand offering a product or offering a stance, whether sustainable or ethical, to their customers? How strong is the power coming from the customer to the brand?
So I think that consumers have a strong role to play. I think that they at the end of the day create demand for things, and the business follows that demand. So I do believe that they have a strong place and role to play. But I think at the same time, it's important as we have this conversation to not point fingers or to give the responsibility to one sector versus the other. So it's not fully the brand's responsibility, it's not fully the consumer's responsibility, it's not fully the supplier's responsibility, it's collectively coming together to eventually create this ripple effect that happens. But yeah, I believe consumers demanding a different set of practices create change. You see fast fashion brands now launching ethical collections. Their board is not sitting in that boardroom and thinking, oh my God, I feel nice today, let's be sustainable. No, like they're thinking there's a business trend here, there's money in it, I'm gonna follow where that goes. So I do think that they play an important role.
But I feel like with fast fashion trying to introduce sustainable ways, I think it's a good domino kind of chain effect. I think it's going to force a lot of suppliers and fabric manufacturers to like push more the sustainable kind of fabric, and then it will just like roll over to affect other fast fashion brands.
I agree, and I'm glad that they're doing it, but I personally believe fast fashion will never be sustainable because the business model in itself is broken.
I mean, just to complete what you guys are saying, I mean, one of the interesting fast fashion players is H&M, which has put forth extremely ambitious goals. I mean, Nike is one of the brands that is actually doing something, and I think that all of that has been initiated in part due to consumers. And when I speak about consumers, it's all of us, right? I mean, at any position that we are all consumers, and we all have a voice, and some of us make our voice heard. And I think that's really the only way forward. So H&M does have a lot of initiatives, extremely ambitious plans. Now we'll just have to wait and see how far they go with their plans.
I think there's so much power with the consumer. If you're anything like me, if you're a consumer like me, I do call out and I do try to apply pressure on brands to change certain things, and I have kind of affected change, so I think that there is power, and customer holds a lot of power. Another question.
Hi, how are you ladies? So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you. I've been looking forward to this talk.
Could you speak up, please?
Yes, sure. I'll just get to the question. I wanted to ask, since we're coming from a region where it's all about buying and consuming and, you know, we keep buying, it's all about that. So how do you propose that's ever going to change with everything being bombarded and, you know, with brands and, you know, how do you suppose we can be effective and also wear secondhand clothing when I feel like it's a very difficult process for people to digest? How do you propose that could ever happen in this region? Thank you.
I think it's all part of a process. There is no overnight answer here. There's clearly no overnight answer because we're looking at a 360 change across the world. And the impact of our buying decisions, I think it's really to each one of us to kind of look at what we have in our wardrobes. I mean, I ask myself this question. I've been working, we have all the privileges to work in the luxury industry for 20 years, but I ask myself this question, do I really need this item? And I think that each one of us, so, you know, it's really, it depends on the individual. It really is an action. It's a collective action at the same time. And it is not on one company or on one brand. So, but these things, I mean, we've just begun talking about it. The conversation has just begun, especially in this part of the world. In other parts of the world, the conversation probably began a bit earlier. And in Europe, you know, one of the things I mentioned earlier, right? I mean, how did companies like, you know, companies that are either on the sharing, you know, the sharing model or the reselling model, that wasn't very acceptable in Europe either 20 years ago. You know what I mean? People would buy vintage, but expensive, nice vintage. But, I mean, you just Google and, I mean, there's so many markets, the town hall does that. And, you know, we just have at hand a Savon de Marseille ready, which is a soap. It's a soap from the south of France. And, I mean, I've done that, and I just kind of clean off the stains of the whatever I bought. So it's a mentality change, it's a process, there's nothing magical here, there's nothing overnight here.
But do you think there should be more awareness and more talks in the region, as well as if you want to throw away fabric, if you want to, give, if there's like a, I don't know, somewhere where you could kind of get rid of material rather than just put it in the dustbin, or
the problem with recycling fabric is only certain types of fabric can be recycled, depending on what chemicals are used in the fabric. So there are lots of NGOs that are working on lobbying factories and manufacturers and brands to manufacture for longer life cycles, so that the product lasts longer and then can be recycled again. So I think the change has to happen within. I do think there's a gradual change in the way that the hashtag outfit of the day became very popular. Social media is really powerful in shifting mentalities. We can see it that everybody's becoming vegan, veganism is trending, but it stems very deep. Social media can shift. I think it's a really powerful tool, and the change is happening, but it's happening so slow that you can't really tell that it's happening. But I see people changing their minds about things every day around me, and I'm like, something's happening. So, sorry.
Hi guys, it's more of an observation, more than a question maybe, but I have noticed a lot here in the region, and you guys have tipped on it as well a little bit, but there is a massive lack of education as to what actual sustainability is. You can treat a high street product sustainably for the rest of its days, versus a luxury product. There's still a lot of people who can't afford to buy luxury and treat it in that way. So I think education, if you are going to try to make a change and use social media and use all of these things, I think what's actually missing is that education. What is ethical? What is sustainability? And in what way can you, in your life, with whatever means you have, grow in that way? And I think that's actually a lot of the basis of the problem, and why maybe it's not wider spread like it might be in Europe at the moment. Just a thought.
Completely agree, 100%. I think that there is, as we talk more about these issues, change will happen. I do think that we, in our roles, in our everyday roles, dismiss our power in our talk and how we influence even our surrounding and our own family, and trickles down from that. One of the biggest things that I think is a taboo here in this culture is that to wear things more than once, right? If you go to an event, oh my God, I wore that dress before. And that's ridiculous, because the truth is, you wear clothes more than once.
The truth is, we need to make that cool again.
Yeah, and we do need to make it cool.
You just don't need to get photographed twice.
And so just wear it and show to your people, to your surrounding, to your family that that's completely fine. Show it on social media
but wear it differently as well. There's so many ways a piece can be worn. It depends on the style. I make pieces that are versatile, that can be you can make it sleeveless or you can make it cropped or whatever, but it also about how the consumer looks at it. They need to play around with it and make sure, to use it differently.
And at the end of the day, take care of whatever you have. Like you said, there's a documentary film that I helped support a while back called The True Cost. And a lot of people, when they watch The True Cost, feel this sense of doomsday, oh my God, we are ruined, life is worse, I'm gonna throw away all my clothes. And I'm like, no. Don't throw away all your H&M and Zara. Take care of the H&M and Zara that you have. Just don't buy more, maybe, and invest in the future in really good pieces that you can take care of, that you'll love for a very long time, that you'll give to the next generation. Some of my favorite pieces come from my mom and my aunt. I want to be able to give those pieces to my daughter and the generation after that, and they have to be well made and well taken care of in order to do that.
I think we have time for one question.
I'm sorry if it's not a question, but since I'm here and since you mentioned what are we doing here in the region, we're a local NGO, ahlanwasahlan.org, and one of the things we've been doing is we've been collecting waste from different designers here in D3 and using that in our upcycling projects. And we do a lot of awareness talks for sustainability across different design sectors. One of them is fashion.
Is it like repurposing?
Yes, so we used, I actually went door to door to different fashion designers once, and I collected a lot of fabric. There's a lot of leftover fabric, especially, I mean, it's not even, they cater to a very specific clientele, and a lot of the fabric is very expensive. And we use that. We used it, for example, in gift wrapping around Christmas time, and we made reusable bags out of some of it. So there's a lot that can be done, and this is an open invitation to everyone to just participate or collaborate with us. And I've been wearing this more than once.
Super cool.
That's amazing.
And also, I
Thank
think
you. Thank you all so much for being with us today. And if you take anything from this talk is, I think with sustainability now being such a big issue in the industry, it's a great time to be alive. And there are so many amazing projects coming out of it, and so many new startups and platforms that are doing great things. So I hope that you're inspired to make a change.
Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank
This
you.
was,
Thank
I think they deserve another round of applause. Such a dynamic, important conversation. And that's a wrap for the Fashion Talks this season. Thank you all for being here.